Hello, everyone. I'm Marilyn Turkovich from the Charter for Compassion. And thank you all for being a part of this conference. It's truly been a wonderful exchange of ideas and a vision that so many of you are sharing. I'm really honored to be with Joan Blades today. And Joan has been a part of the Charter for a number of years in terms of she was one of the very first people that we honored with the Charter for Compassion Humanitarian Award during Compassion Week back in San Francisco. I think it was probably around 2011 or so. And we got so much involved with her living room conversations a number of years ago and helping to train facilitators from the Charter for Compassion so that they would feel equipped to have these conversations within their own communities. I think it's fair to say that Joan is probably one of the most influential civic innovators and grassroots organizers of our time, especially here in the United States. Many people know her as the co-founder of Move On, and that has expanded beyond Move On to Living Room Conversations, Mom Rising, and I know that she's been involved in a lot of other grassroots groups, Coalition for Public Safety, where she got involved with criminal justice reform, and then she has been conversant with the Bioneers, an organization that we really look up to, and the Bioneers certainly are very concerned with issues around democracy and civic healing. So I think that, Joan is a voice that we want to hear because we're living in a time of polarization, and our public life, as we have come to feel comfortably to say, it's been fairly good. And while a lot of this is centered around the United States, I think the issues that we will be talking about today go beyond borders. And I think that, democracy is certainly threatened not only within our own country, but in other countries around the world. It's kind of putting us into, I've heard words like fear. People are fearful. People are numb. But I think that hopefully through this conference and through a lot of efforts of outstanding groups, all of which, we need to really embrace, that we're trying to build courage and compassion. And a part of a lot of this work, especially Joan's work, is building trust between people. So that's my introduction to who I feel is a very important figure that we want to share her voice with you today. So Joan, I'm going to turn it over to you. Joan and I agreed a couple days ago that we'd just have a conversation, maybe a little bit between ourselves, but more importantly, to really monitor what's happening in the chat, because we want people to ask questions. And, Joan, I'm wondering if in this beginning part, if you could talk a little bit about how you got started in all of this work, and then maybe what's at the core of Living Room Conversations, Mom Rising, and then I'll monitor the chat to see if folks are asking us questions, and if not, we'll ask them questions.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you for having me. Thank you for such a generous introduction. How did I get started at this? I'm actually a mediator by origin and inclination, and Move On started way back last century during the Clinton impeachment scandal when my husband and I shared a one sentence petition. Congress must immediately censure the president and move on to pressing issues facing the nation. Because love Clinton or hate Clinton, it was political theater that was causing ever more polarization. This was 6 months into the scandal, and people were sick to death. The whole thing, and censoring him was very appropriate. But even if he got impeached, he wasn't going to be taken from office. So it was political theater. That was unfortunately something going on. And in some ways, I think about how it felt like that was so polarizing at the time. And now I am just shocked by the level of polarization we have achieved. And Moms Rising was founded because we don't hate mothers. And, there's a profound bias against mothers in hiring, wages, and advancement. And why would that be? That felt like a very unifying opportunity to bring people together from across the political spectrum. And it's a wonderful organization also that focuses on that shared desire to have thriving families. But it became apparent to me at a certain point that the core of this problem really being in connection with each other. I live in Berkeley, California, which is a very progressive place. And in 2004, I'm like, why aren't conservatives concerned about climate? And I was able to have meetings with people from across the political spectrum, good conversations, but I had to be very intentional about it. By 2008, and I learned a lot. It made me more able to proceed in a way that would be productive. But by 2008, it was harder to have a conversation with someone across the political divide because it has become more of a divide. And living room conversations are an opportunity to be very intentional about having conversations with people that see things differently than we do. And yes, it started around politics, but they've been about all sorts of differences in the years to follow, because it started in 2010 with a pilot. And, age differences, geographic differences, gender differences, all the differences, they matter. And then COVID happened, and it was this beautiful way to connect with people about our deeper values. Because at the heart of the living room conversation practice is really seeing each other, building deeper understanding of the people you're sitting with, and it turns out better understanding of yourself too. One of my favorite conversations, which was a tough conversation for us for years, was a forgiveness conversation. I started that conversation and I think I'm old enough, I've thought about this, but I always learn more about myself as well as the people in the conversation.
Joan, I just want to ask, I know the story, and I don't know how many other people know the story, but what drove you to I think, found Living Room Conversations?
Well, it really was concern about climate, because we're not going to deal with climate issues until we do it together. I've been talking about power with as compared to power over in the last while, because we're working on power over most of the time, and that gives us the fight. We win, they win, we win, they win, but we don't actually take care of the big issues we have to take care of. When we do things together, honoring the fact that we are different and have different needs, but really wanting to care for each other, we come up with solutions that are more creative, more robust. You know, my friend Jacob in Utah, climate wasn't on his list of concerns when I met him. It got on his list of concerns, not because I'm amazingly persuasive, but because he cares about me. And another friend of his is deeply concerned about this. We care about what the people we love care about, not the same way, but that kind of connection is so important. I don't want Jacob to be marginalized. This seeing each other and, you know, seeing everyone's divinity is the way a lot of faith communities define this. And humanist faith community, this is a practice for really valuing everybody. And it's, you know, some places do it monthly, libraries, educational institutions, faith communities, and others just do it once. And we have over 150 conversation guides, ranging from things that are divisions, guns and responsibility. Now that's not left-right so much as people that really love to have their guns and people that don't. There's one community in Idaho, evangelical community, that had that conversation one month. They were going for the tough ones. And there's a woman at the table, and 4 to 6 people is the living room conversation size. One of the women had been traumatized by guns, not once, but multiple times. And there were 2 men at that table that had been, you know, they were ready to die for their Second Amendment rights to have the right to guns. And what happened there was not that they totally changed their minds, but they heard each other. She heard about how their, you know, traditions with that and that family, guns were really part of the male bonding that happened in the family of these men. And they heard how traumatized she'd been. And they had empathy for each other. You know, when you talk about Charter for Compassion, you know, it builds up our compassion for each other when we know each other's story.
You know, there's a question here from Merida, and she said, how can we take all of this beyond our silos? Our silo might be actually guns, and with AI selecting what people see through algorithms, we don't get a chance for them, and vice versa.
That's a great thing to be thinking about. Clearly, because I live in Berkeley, I had to think about it hard. And I had because I was a co-founder of Move On, I was able to get into a group called be part of organizing a group called Reuniting America. Well, you know, the design of the conversation can be, if you want to, 2 people with very different views, each invite 2 people for conversation. I invited the co-founder of Tea Party Patriots to co-host a conversation with me in my living room. And he brought 2 of his friends, I brought 2 of mine, and it was an amazing conversation where we learned a lot. And we learned that we had some very important common ground around criminal justice issues, which led to some really meaningful work in that area. So the question is, what kind of differences are you hoping to explore? And the conversation guide allows you to talk about your experience with that topic. So you're not talking theory, you're not talking, you know, it's not talking points, it's about your personal relationship with whatever you're talking about. Did this in Utah a number of years ago with the group that was going to speak at the library. And we had a conversation from 7:30 to 9. And then we had to kick people out at 11 o'clock because the conversation is not the whole thing. What it is it's building that trust in relationships. So then you can go further. You can have those conversations you haven't been having because you didn't have that connection or because you were worried about how to broach the topic.
You know, this is maybe a crazy question, but how is it that you get to the core of trust with a new group of people that probably don't know one another? And here you achieved it in a couple hours.
Well, we have self-selected, divided ourselves rather intentionally more and more because our media has been focusing on all the bad ways we have conflict. And most of us, when we think about, conflict in our families, don't think about the good conflict, but we think about the bad conflict. But to have conflict is human. And workplaces understand that when you have good conflict, you have better solutions. You have better relationships. As a person that really wants to see climate addressed, I don't think we're going to do it until we have good relationships with each other. And I started this talking about energy and climate, and now I don't care what people talk about. And there's a whole lot more than climate I think we need to address.
Yeah. And I think those 150 guides that you have, there's very few topics I think that people could think of that are not part of living room conversations. And so certainly the invitation is there to go check everything out. There's another question. Well, it's not a question. It's a reflection from Dawn. And she says, power with versus power over is essential in all organizations and systems as much as it is possible. Power with versus power over is essential. Go ahead.
I'm hoping that becomes something that more and more people embrace, because the focus on the fight tends to overwhelm us, and we forget to do the peace building. And power with is really about peace building, relationship building, understanding that to be a thriving society, we need to be embracing everybody in the society. We all need to thrive together.
Yeah, there's another reflection here, and it's from Felipe, and he's following the Chinese character that is the same for when there's a conflict, that it's conflict and it's opportunity. And Felipe is saying conflict is an opportunity to communicate. But
Yes.
Very few people feel that. And I'm wondering why that's true. I mean, is it because, going back to that issue of trust, that we don't trust too many people anymore? And maybe this is a stretch, but is the lack of trust that we might have towards others because of the very fact that we don't know many people anymore? Even though we might have 15,000 people who are in our social media, we really don't know them.
I think you've touched on a lot of very important aspects of what we're challenged by right now. One of my favorite conversations guides is technology and relationships. And in that conversation guide, left and right don't matter, particularly age matters a whole lot in your perspective about technology and relationships. There are ways that our media has been very effective in pulling us apart and causing us to be fearful of one another. And there instinctually, things that cause us to be fear or anger catch our attention. And so it's just been profitable for the media to do that and for some leaders to do that. And so we have to make a very conscious choice to connect, to find ways to embrace our common ground. I think about the work I'm doing as one step at a time. Successful societies have high levels of trust, and our trust in our government, our trust in our media, our trust in each other, it's just all gone down. And, part of that is having the personal relationship. I can also say that, what we're doing right now is extraordinary. We're having a conversation, you're in some other part of this country, people from all around the world are able to listen to this discussion. And we have done research with the living room conversations that both the in-person and the video conversations have the impact we're looking for, building skills for communicating and building trust. But that, we also do have video here. I think every level of loss of, voice tone and body language, and we lose some of the communication. So a text message gives you a fraction of what a voice, which gives you a part of what a video call gives. And if you're here in person with me, it's clearly the very best.
Mm-hmm.
But, we, during COVID, we had one mom that did conversations with her mother's friends, and her nephews. And so mother and friend in another state, nephews in another state. And it allowed her to get to know her nephews in ways she wouldn't have. It allowed her to take care of her mother when her mother was feeling isolated.
Mm-hmm.
When can we do this again? So it's, I do not dismiss the values of having the technology, but I do also recognize that it's not enough. We need to do multiple things.
I think you're right. And I'm looking at a comment here from Erin, and she says, when we do things with others, we intentionally invite them into our space or spaces. And I think there's a lot wrapped up in that reflection, because part of it is that when we personally invite someone into our space, I think that we're offering a safe space. And that is not something that could readily be done on Zoom. It might be accomplished more easily if people already know one another, like the relatives that you were speaking of. But when you bring at random a whole new group of people, I think it puts a little bit more pressure on how is it that you have this intentional space that will move you towards a safe space that will give you that level of trust that you hope that you can have.
And now probably a good time to introduce the conversation agreements.
Okay. Because and so those people who have control of the slides, it would be the second slide. Although let's show the first one too, because I love it.
So the thing to remember about the living room conversations is it is an intentional bringing people together, and we do it by video as well as in person. And when you have agreed to be respectful, to be curious, to own your part of the conversation, it's basically everything you learned in kindergarten. Then people have a wonderful conversation, and even with never having met, you can become pretty darn close to people. There are people that, I feel very close to, through this work that I haven't met in person. And they're wonderful. But, you know, it's kind of marvelous. Okay, we can go to the next slide now. Thank you. So these 6 conversation agreements, if people are able to agree to this, and I will admit there are some people that cannot agree to this. You probably know someone like that, and you're not going to invite them to your living room conversation. It's a practice that requires coming voluntarily and agreeing to this. But with that, then we have 3 conversation rounds. The first round are simple questions that get people talking a little bit about who they are. Like, what would your best friend say about who you are? Or what's your mission in life? So that by the time you get to the topic questions, which there are 4 to 6 of, you have a sense of the people you're sitting with. I think it's fun having some people you don't know in the conversation in person or by video, because, you know, it's making new friends and is in addition to deepening friendships you already have. And then you talk about your own personal relationship with that topic, and the close is just reflection and next steps. The beauty of this is it's simple, and it's always surprising how much deeper the conversation is than you might have expected. You know, trust is a beautiful conversation we have that, you know, is a great way to just kind of ground in your own values and think deeply about something that matters. And thank you for the slide. We can go back to being video if you like.
Okay. There are a number of other reflections and questions here. One from Patty Williams in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Patty was in one of the first training groups that we did from the charter with living room conversations, and she said, when we organized living room conversations once a month, we often attracted like-minded participants. What are strategies for reaching really divergent viewpoints?
Okay, so for me to have a conversation with the co-founder of Tea Party Patriots required a friend of mine saying, co-founder Move On, co-founder Living, you guys should meet. And then it was more work because, you know, we had to build some trust before we could invite our friends to the conversation together. The question is, do you know someone? You know, if you want to have diversity, I think you do have to be very intentional about it. You know, whatever specific kind of diversity you're looking for, you've got to create it. When I go to a progressive conference, I'll take something like the technology and relationships, persuasion, trust, something where it's not polarized. But if you have something like abortion, you don't want one person in that conversation that is pro-life and everyone else that's not. They're going to feel intimidated. They're going to feel like they have to represent their point of view and everybody else is on their side. You want to be sure you have balance. And likewise, if you have a conversation like abortion and everybody in the room believes that it's good or it's bad, it just intensifies your sense of I'm right and they're wrong. So either way, you really want to be intentional about creating diversity, and that does take more work. But hopefully, if you don't have a friend that, you know, has a different viewpoint that you want to explore, maybe you have a friend that has a friend, like, you know, my friend Ralph connecting me to Mark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Something tells me that in today's world, that it probably, Patty, is a little bit different than when we started. preparing for living room conversations. I know that on the road that I live on, people have signs, and I think that we know the positions of other people, and unfortunately, oftentimes we avoid the possibility of a living conversation. Paul Andrews, and Paul is a colleague from Voices for a World Free of Nuclear Weapons. So I'll just put that out there. And here is his question. Are there ways or methods to take the wisdom of living room conversations into engagement with policy and decision makers without losing the critical personal nature of connection?
It very much depends on what kind of policy and decision maker environment you're going into. I think the basic principles of the conversation agreements are good to take with you everywhere. There are a lot of people that have built their muscles around that and found it very useful in the rest of their life. I've got to note that in terms of nuclear weapons, that is a conversation I've had, and it's very hard to get people to show up for that conversation because they don't feel like they know enough. And that's a problem because, it's the sort of thing we need to create citizen foundation for continuing to decrease the number of nuclear weapons and making sure that we continue to not detonate any nuclear weapons. That's my personal belief, clearly. It's like.
But I think this is something that we've wrestled with in Voices, just because of the very fact that it's not on people's radar at all. It's not on the front burner anymore at all. But, definitely the threat has increased. And, that's our job right now. And we're working, I think, Paul in particular, feverishly in trying to tackle that problem.
My understanding is the day after created a moment of real meaningful concern. And since that, people that weren't there at the point that particular film aired just feel it has lost visibility to the vast majority of people. And climate has become the thing that's visible.
Yeah.
Both of them are a threat to our world as we know it. And I would love to figure out a way to correct that.
Well, we've been working on, the whole notion that there is this incredible connection between nuclear weapons and climate. I mean, they are so interrelated. If there was even a small accident of a nuclear release, what that would do to the climate. But we'll keep moving on here. There's something from Sister Barbara up in Canada. I love what you're doing, creating safe spaces. Dare to listen with courage to listen. Do you know the global movement that is one in 2024-25 global synods gatherings in Rome of delegates in the Catholic Church, two this year to have listening circles in every parish regularly, globally? Didn't know about that at all. And then there's three. In 2027, every region, every diocese within, I guess, the Catholic community to have a major circle. I guess I'm going back to that listening circle. And in 2028, another 6 weeks or so, a big global one in Rome. Purpose to listen to everyone, listen to people with different views, not asking the group to agree, just listen to everyone Even if half does this, it's similar. The global, region, and local are all listening circles. Wow, didn't know that.
Yeah, listening is, I often describe this as a listening practice. And it's remarkable how powerful it is to listen to someone. And frequently, when you do real listening, it's reciprocated. And that is when, things start to connect in meaningful ways. Um, and I hope, one of the things I would hope with this program is that they give the folks that are listened to the tools to go out into their community and listen to others so that it's got to spread.
Yeah. Thank you, Barbara, for that news flash. And I think we all are going to have to find out a little bit more about it. Okay, we have a lot of questions here. The next one is from Derek. And could we discuss what is trust? Because we often make emphasis on this as the missing or present agreement. How is this built, and how is it important? Maybe and obvious thing, but definition is important.
Well, in terms of trust, I think we all have our own personal definition of trust. We have a red-blue dictionary for hundreds and hundreds of words because in the US, the people on the right and the people on the left can use the same word to say different things. I think what I like about the living room conversation about trust is it is just listening to each person talk about their personal relationship with trust. Because that to me is the most accurate for the individual. We all understand things somewhat differently. And right now my focus is trustworthy elections in the US because there's been a campaign to undermine trust in their elections, and people have agency locally, and if they understand their local election practice, and if they're satisfied, that's good. If they're not, it needs to be fixed. And then we want to have local pride, and then we need to build trust. So first, trust locally, second, trust nationally. That's my project this year with some other wonderful organizations. Trust in the news is another complete discussion. We could have 10 guides about trust, and each one would be rich and meaningful.
Yeah, I was just thinking about Derek's question here, and I think that oftentimes when you're in a small setting, that what you're looking at for trust is that as I share with you my story, I don't give you permission to share it with other people unless you ask me. I mean, so I think that each one of us, because you said this, that we all have our own definitions of trust. And so, well, I think that establishing what that definition is as you're entering a conversation is really important. And I wish that I would be better about looking ahead at what some of these questions are or comments. What do you expect from trust? This is another part of Derek's contribution here. And then he did make a statement about nuclear weapons, but first I'll say, what do you expect from trust?
Well, Robert Putnam has written a book, Bowling Alone, and then Join or Die, which the core of this is when we have societies that are low on trust, they're far less effective. Healthy societies have high levels of trust. And I expect certain kind of trust with my husband, and another kind of trust with governance, and another kind of, so it all depends on which relationship we're talking about. But if I don't trust, then all of a sudden everything is a lot more work.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of cost to having a society that is low trust.
Yeah. Here's another question, and not so easy. How do we protect our emotional safety when hearing different viewpoints that their beliefs mean harm to you or your communities? I'm interested in staying objective to truly understand viewpoints that are complete polar opposites.
Protecting emotional safety is an interesting way of an interesting thing to try to do, because what is emotional safety? Is emotional safety, not getting triggered? I think if it's that, I think college professors have had a hard time with being able to talk about a lot of things because of, emotional safety issues. We don't want people to be traumatized to the point where they are not able to handle it. On the other hand, if you don't talk about things, that's a problem too. And different people are ready at different times for a conversation. There's things that are too raw to talk about. This question is huge.
That's what I said when I dared to read it.
So, I know some people's beliefs and viewpoints are harming my community, but I feel like I can listen to better understand how to find ways to get rid of the harm, to decrease the harm, to maybe make things good. But there are people that it's too much for, and that's, each individual has to choose for themselves what is acceptable.
This might sound very simplistic, but I have often found that in conversations, that when I know that there's a possible standstill, or the fact that we could collide definitely on this, is to ask permission of the person that you're speaking with, or a group that you're in opposition to say simply, would you consider listening to my position? I want to really totally listen to yours. And I think asking for permission is really important. And when you have these really delicate and vulnerable places in a conversation, it's just something that I've learned along the line, but I'm just offering it as a suggestion.
Sometimes, ouch, is, but it's trying to create the right amount of safety so that you're on your learning edge and not on the falling into the place where you can't deal, and not so safe that you don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
It's tricky. It's not easy.
No, not at all.
In the living room conversation, we're attempting to make a place where people can dip their toe in a relatively safe space. And I only say relatively because different people have different needs.
Yeah. Here's another one from Dawn. I have found some people, particularly older people, hesitant to talk to others of different ages and backgrounds because of fears of saying something that is interpreted as inappropriate or a microaggression. given sensitivities today and wanting to cause no harm or offend others? What can help?
Um, I think having these kinds of conversations where you have a set of understandings going into the conversation, building some trust. This is really a trust issue, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And it is, there's a lot of cultural differences that are sensitivities. And it's just one step at a time.
Mhm.
Um, but the presumption, if we can get people presuming good intent, that's a good start.
Yeah.
And I think the conversations tend to do that.
Yeah.
So much to say to this too. It's a tough one.
Yeah, but I'm wondering. I think this is a wonderful guide that is in should be dealt with, because I think we're so robbed of intergenerational conversation. I think so many of people of my age grew up, to a certain extent, being raised by my grandparents. And, I walked away from my earlier life thinking that it's really grandparents are much better at raising kids than parents. And, I feel badly that young people who don't have older people around them, it's really a void in people's lives. So that I think that this is really a particularly important issue, as the very fact that the majority of people world over are younger at this point than the older generation. And we really need to find ways to start talking. I'm just going to quickly say that in the chat, there are some URLs that you should pay attention to, both that relate specifically to the work of Joan, but in this case, Joan Blades, but Joan Clary has put in the URL for Voices for a World Free of Nuclear Weapons, and Anam is saying that the Charter is proud to partner with Voices for a World Free of Nuclear Weapons Youth Award, which honors the courage of young people who are working to abolish nuclear weapons and shape a safer, more compassionate world. And Steve Kramer, our interfaith group in Seattle Northwest Interfaith, has been having the same issue as Patty all the way back when we started this conversation. Patty saying that, like people were coming to the conversations. Our dinner with others and sacred conversation events tend to attract people with similar viewpoints. We are working to form bridges with braver angels.
One thing I would suggest is trying to encourage people to actually have co-host conversations where they can have two of their friends in each and allow it to happen that way, to then be able to bring those friends.
Yes.
So it's a multi-step process,
Mm-hmm.
but it might be quite effective. And I'd love to hear all about it if you do that. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. And James, thank you for reminding us of our very first speaker yesterday, David Sloan Wilson, and the core design principles that he spoke about and how they might really apply to conversation circles. And that reflects the work of Elinor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics a number of years ago. Wow, there's so much more here, and I think, are out of time, but I don't want us to close down without me asking you, Joan. I've heard you say that you are so excited about the work of Moms Rising, and so I want you to just talk about that before we close down.
Well, Moms Rising is just doing beautiful work in the U.S. around family issues, and really the reason there's a bias against mothers and hiring wages and advancement is we have a systemic problem. There's not paid leave for new mothers in this country, whereas the vast majority, I think there's 6 that don't have paid leave for new mothers. So we literally have mothers go back to work days after giving birth in this country. Because, feed the children, take care of the new baby, it's not a fair question. But then healthcare has become unreasonably expensive. And, childcare costs more than sending a child to college in so many places. It's just the whole system is not making it possible for parents to do exactly what they want to do, which is take care of their responsibilities both at home and at work. Work needs to be structured so that parents can take care of responsibilities at work and at home. The ideal worker was assumed to have someone at home taking care of the family. That's not the case for almost the vast majority of families anymore. So giving everybody what they need is for being able to meet their responsibility. It's good for the businesses, it's good for the workers. Turnover is very expensive. You get great people, you want to make them happy. So anyway, it's a whole lot of good things. Mom's Rising is amazing and wonderful and working on all issues that are so many it's hard to keep up with, I'm afraid.
Well, I'm going to ask you, I know I said that was the last question, but this is maybe the last question. Just because of the very fact that you've been in this work of grassroots organizing, and you've done it from Move On, which is like really big in terms of trying to work with huge groups of people, to living room conversations that are like 6 or 8 people in a setting. What have you learned through the years?
I have seen that we can make change together, and we have to believe in our power. And that's what I worry about at this point, is people are feeling too overwhelmed. We want to offer ways for us to collectively do things that are meaningful and enhance our lives and the lives of the communities we live in. And I think we can do that. And it happens through relationship and caring. And compassion is a wonderful quality that is underlying all that.
Great. Wonderful way to end. And with the slogan that is international, the people united will never be defeated. Thanks so much, Joan.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.